Welcome everybody to Thursday's Lean In. I hope you're well and really excited to have a fantastic Lean In session for you again today. And something a bit different today. As you well know, we had a very creative day on Tuesday. We looked at the science of colour, and today we continue in that vein. So we've moved away, like I said, from the mental health side of things, and now we're going down a bit more of a fun route this week. We've looked at colour. And today we look at some beautiful creative work, and we're really very pleased to have Samuel and Owen from UAP Company with us today as well. So, like I said, a creative path. We're going to open the doors and take a very exclusive look inside UAP Company, and that's a global organisation that works with architects and artists across the world. And they develop and construct a huge amount of incredible creative concepts. And so they work with architects and they work very much outside the box. They go to some significant lengths to ensure that, the craziest ideas that architects dream up can be made a reality through 3D printing and through robotics and a whole lot of different stuff. So fascinating, a little bit different, like I said. We're very excited to have two speakers with us today. Samuel Mays, who is the Director of Strategic Projects in Australia and the Middle East region. Samuel's very much focused on business development, so he positions UAP to collaborate with world-leading architects and artists to design and construct very bespoke, technically challenging projects for the public realm across Australia and the Middle East. Samuel, of course, is a registered architect in Queensland and holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Queensland. And joining Samuel is Owen Craven. So Owen is the Director of New Business. Welcome, Owen. And Owen leads the BD team in Australia. So he's a senior curator for the organisation. And he works closely with clients and artists as they create work in response to specific projects and places. So I'm really very excited to welcome both Samuel and Owen to our very informal lean-in today, a bit creative, a bit fun. Great to have you with us both, Samuel and Owen, and look forward to hearing what you've got to say on the importance of public places. So over to you, gentlemen.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us on probably your lunch break as well. UAP, we are a very unique art design and fabrication firm. UAP stands for Urban Art Projects, and it was founded about 25 years ago in Brisbane. We describe ourselves as explorers, as creatives, as makers, and at the core what we do is we collaborate with creative thinkers, be they artists, architects, designers, developers, and we love to bring the uncommon and the bespoke creativity into the public realm. We act as a resource for our clients. As a firm, we curate, we design, and we fabricate. So thinking about COVID and the world that we all exist in now, what was it like before? What is it going to be like? I suppose one of the things that we have always been driven by is creating unique public spaces that inspire people. And as architects sitting on this presentation, you're all driven by the same thing. How do we create a space or a place or a building that is about people, that contributes to our civic spaces and places? We have a team of curators and designers with sort of industrial design or architecture or landscape architecture background. We have technical designers who work with robotics and advanced manufacturing techniques. And then we also have a team of artisans who are our fabricators. We work on strategies at the front end. We work on developing designs and pushing them into a space where they're able to be fabricated and integrated into a public space or a building. Since starting the business around 25 years ago, which, as I said, was founded in Brisbane, we now have a global reach. And if we move over to the next slide, we have a map of everywhere that we exist. So while we're headquartered in Brisbane, we also have large design studios and fabrication facilities in both Shanghai and in New York. But from those three locations, we deliver projects all around the world. This slide gives an overview of our fabrication facilities. So in Brisbane on the top left there's 5,000 square meters of workshop space that includes advanced manufacturing robots. It includes project managers who coordinate between the the creative intent and the general contractors for integrating. In the middle there, that's one of our workshops in Shanghai, where we have a range of alternative capabilities, I suppose. So where we've got a lot of investment in advanced manufacturing, we have a lot of very traditional capability in our Shanghai studio, and the likes of panel beating stainless steel and stone masonry, for example. And on the right-hand side is our workshop in Rock Tavern, upstate New York. We acquired a fabrication capability about 18 months ago now, formerly a family-owned business, very much like what UAP is, that had some 45 years worth of experience creating work for the likes of Jeff Koons and Louise Bourgeois, and they, similar to the Brisbane and Shanghai workshops, create work with a range of different capability, from metalworks and casting in our foundry across a range of different materials. But one of the best ways that I thought we could talk about COVID, post-COVID, was to show you some examples and how we believe the importance of creativity in the public realm and in public spaces is going to ensue over the coming years as we grapple with what do places look like? How do we work as designers, as architects, as artists, as creatives in creating places that people feel safe in, that reinvigorate our economies, that draw people out of their homes and into the public and interacting with our economy and our society. This photograph was taken only a few months ago, a work by Kehinde Wiley, who is a very famous painter originally. We fabricated this work with Kehinde Wiley and in collaboration with his New York gallery, Sean Kelly Gallery, and Times Square. The work is called Rumours of War. Kehinde is probably very well known for painting the official portrait of President Barack Obama as he left the office. His work has always been around looking at elevating the African American within society and using key elements within his paintings, and indeed in this sculpture here. The work is to look like a Confederate statue. However, if you look closer, it's actually an African American man with dreadlocks and a Nike tick on his shoe, for instance. This work drew people out. It engaged people in conversations. It was photographed. It was spread across a range of different media. And as you can see, thousands upon thousands of people saw it and were drawn to come and see this work. Art and creativity contribute to public space as much as landscape architecture and fantastic architecture does in moving people through, and it can give people a point of reason to come and visit. We hope that that's where we get to in the next couple of years. One of the ways that we think can really ground us, we've got a range of works here by Indigenous artists that we've worked with. Judy Watson was commissioned as part of the 200 George Street project in Sydney, the Ernst & Young headquarters. Mirvac were the commissioners at FJMT with the architects. What's really, really special about this work, though, is that it is about the place. It is telling the story, and it is literally taking the land that the building is built upon. The work is the building site is located on the Tank Stream, obviously a very significant site for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people as we settled Australia. But the work is actually fabricated using the sandstone that was quarried from that site. So Judy consulted with local Indigenous elders to tell stories and to find artifacts that were important, like the dilly bag that you can see in the middle of there from Indigenous culture. There's text that is engraved in both English and traditional language of the site and tells the story again. It really is a work that as you enter this new building and as people are walking into their offices every single day and walking through that lift core to go up to their offices, they're reminded that there was a history before this site and that it mines deeply below the actual basement of the building itself. The next project we have is a work that is by Alison Page. We worked with the Barangaroo Development Authority on developing a curatorial theme, a framework, whereby they wanted to educate people the importance of country, bringing people onto a traditional site, obviously very much a driver within the whole Barangaroo precinct. Wellama is inspired by a contemporary reimagining of the Welcome to Country. It's a film that was produced and lasts about 5 minutes and is on permanent display, welcoming people at the cutaway there. Alison Page, a woman from Sydney, from the La Perouse area, consulted with traditional owners to tell the story and to educate, not only tell the story or acknowledge country and welcome people to the land, but to actually educate visitors and guests and remind them of the importance of the land and the land that we stand on. It's a work that invites people to pause and stop and reflect. And again, you know, as we come out of this social isolation and this, you know, people asking us to stand back from you know, places and to not dwell, we actually will want to slowly come back into this place. But this is a work that obviously uses space and can still be enjoyed from afar. It can remind us, you know, if you jump onto the website for Barangaroo and watch the show reel, it can also remind us that place is very important, and we can aspire and inspire to be back there. We recently collaborated with Alison and her husband Nick on a major commission that commemorated the landing of Captain Cook some 250 years ago. It was a commission that was delivered in collaboration with the New South Wales government and also the federal government. And the work is called The Eyes of the Land and the Sea. This is a progress shot of the work in our Brisbane workshop. The work is a large 30-metre long sculpture that stands on the shores of the Botany Bay National Park. It is comprised of 7 large-scale cast bronze ribs that are both reflective of the hull of the Endeavour that came and landed, but also the ribs of a whale, which is an important totem for the local Aboriginal community there. Inscribed on the ribs are a series of pieces of text that were extracts from Captain Cook's diary. Things like his observations of the Indigenous people, and one of the most beautiful and pertinent on the primary rib in the centre says that these people want nothing, they want for nothing, they're the happiest people on earth, the land and the sea provides everything that they need. This is a work that we think, again, reminds us of the importance of place, of land, and that we're, you know, while we're all enjoying in some ways our isolation, we are as humans driven to be drawn out of our homes and to interact with place, and place can actually sustain us enormously. So we you know, at UAP believe that we'll work with our clients and our commissioning agents to continue to agitate and to inspire in similar sorts of ways. If we move through to the next slide, Tracy Deep, another Indigenous artist who was commissioned for the AMP Angel Place lobby upgrades on Pitt Street in Sydney again. Those previous works I showed you were works that were sited outside, but this is a work that is bringing the outside in. We worked closely with Hassel as the interior architects, who developed an absolutely gorgeous scheme, as you can see there, which is, again, trying to bring the outside in, encouraging people to use space and to feel like they're not necessarily in the concrete jungle. Each of those works is fabricated from a cast aluminium and cast porcelain elements, and they're inspired by flotsam's, floating spirit, water spirits, elements that would have floated through the tank stream, again, the path that was underneath where these buildings now lie, again bringing these works up and into space. And another work that we delivered in close collaboration with Architectus for Sydney University, Garambara, is a work that was inspired by the importance of place. The Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences building is sited on contested land between a couple of Indigenous communities. And so what Robert did is worked with the academics and the traditional owners to find a word that had some common ground. We all probably know that there were some 700 odd languages for the Indigenous culture, and many of those don't exist anymore, but while they were all unique, they also had some crossover. And Garabara was a word that said welcome, and as a place of knowledge and knowledge transfer in a university. This work was inspired by doing exactly that, trying to inspire and transfer the knowledge and the histories of Indigenous culture in place and time. I think it's interesting that Indigenous culture has played such an important underpinning of what I'm sort of saying here, in that as we move through and come out of isolation and try to bring people together, for me, I think it is about the land, and it's about place and space, and that space is what we're going to need for the foreseeable future while the virus exists in our community. How can we create spaces that that inspire us? Doesn't, though, have to just be Indigenous artists. Obviously, it's important to all of us. I think it's just a very human thing that we're connected to land. Emily Floyd was commissioned, and we worked with her on this project up in Queensland as part of the Queen's Wharf, which is the large development. Ultimately will be an entertainment precinct with hotels and a casino and the like. This work is called Mangrove Poem. It's in Emily's signature style, which is inspired by her toy-making family. The work is called All Shape, and it's a poetic fragment from a historic Queensland figure, Judith Wright, from a poem called Five Senses. And the work is really about asking people to think and stop and pause. Emily likes to create civic spaces, places of contemplation and interaction. And the poem Five Senses is really about how can art engage with all five senses? How can you be aware of sight, sound, taste, etc., to bring you in and to ground you? I think COVID has become a moment of pause for a lot of people, and our families have come together and we spend more time together. I think this is a beautiful artwork that does say, stop, pause, take note of what's around us. Another work that I think highly integrated into architecture, and one of the things that we love doing is working with architects on how can we find a creative solution, an unusual solution for you, and articulate further beyond that. We worked with Catherine Wu on this project over for the Ritz-Carlton in Perth. Catherine is again very wedded to the landscape. A lot of her works are actually they can begin as drawings, where she'll go and take a physical tracing of a landscape. She often goes to the rock faces, and remember when we were children, we would often go and get a piece of paper and get a pencil and rub over the top of the rock texture, and you'd get that beautiful texture. A lot of her work is taken from this, but this work is actually inspired by the Swan River that's close by. She went and she documented and took a lot of photos of the sun hitting the rippling water and the surface tension that we see on top of water when it's just gently undulating. And that is a work that is then translated into a cast aluminium piece. It's a double layered piece. So behind the first layer that you see there is another piece of reflective metal. And in some of these instances, there are holes that you see through. And this idea that we're looking beyond the surface of a building, we're looking beyond the surface of the water into something deep, and to create movement and engage with the ground plane. You see that runner jogging by, just that moment that they may touch the wall as they run past. And that is very much what this work seeks to do. And while we might not be encouraging people to touch things during COVID, hopefully in time, we will actually be encouraging people to interact and to feel and to have that real tactility with what they're presenting. I'm going to hand over to Samuel now to talk a little bit more about the architectural approaches, and I spoke about, I suppose, the stories behind those works, but actually how we go about fabricating and creating them and translating your ideas.
Great, thank you, Owen. And thanks to the Institute and Michael for the invitation to talk today. And part of the premise for us talking is to give our thoughts around how we move forward in a post-COVID-19 world. And I think at this stage, UAP are relatively well placed based on some works that we've been doing over the last couple of years around how we manufacture and deliver our projects. That all started a couple of years ago when we were engaged by Lend Lease to design, fabricate and install this sculptural balustrade for the Gary stair at the UTS building. It's a complex form. There's 22 modules of mirror polished stainless steel that needed to be put together. We fabricated that in our Shanghai workshop and then shipped it out to Sydney to install. But what it also highlighted for us during the design phase was that there's a disconnect between the really amazing, powerful software that architects and designers are using and the fabrication techniques that we implement to realise the projects. So on this one, we had the great model from Gary Partners, and then we ended up panel beating these stainless steel sheets to create the form, which just isn't particularly productive in the long term as a manufacturing opportunity. This led us on a path of looking at advanced robotic manufacturing, and our collaborative research centre with QUT and RMIT, which is about looking at how we can implement new design techniques and vision systems and utilise robots to aid our manufacturing, with the ultimate goal of releasing that information to industry to help Australian manufacturing come back on shore. And we're rather fortunate that we've gone down that process, because in a post-COVID-19 world, we are going to need to be doing far more manufacturing in Australia. It's good for all of us and all of our projects and for our clients. The first of the projects that we tested some of these new technologies was small addition work for Emily Floyd. And as Owen had mentioned a few moments ago, Emily comes from a toy making background. So typically Emily would provide us with a timber marquette similar to the one on the left-hand side of the screen. And we would take that, and our pattern makers would take large pieces of foam, and by eye they would draw onto that foam and then cut the foam to create a pattern. In this project, we stepped back and looked at the existing technologies that we had to look at how we could better utilise them. So we took that marquette apart, we scanned it, we put it back together virtually. We had Emily go into our virtual design room and manipulate the sculpture in a virtual form to get the proportions right. And most importantly, by the time we were able to digitise that model, we were able to use the robot to carve directly into sand molds and create perfectly symmetrical objects. And that's something that we hadn't been able to do when we were working by hand and eye, carving into foam blocks. And Emily's particularly in love with this fabrication process, as are we, as it gives us a great amount of detail that we can get into. Another project where we were taking somewhat existing technologies but putting it into reality was the 80 Collins Street facade and balustrade. So we received some sketch designs from Woods Bagot, and we developed that design purely in a virtual environment. So our designers, you can see in one of the shots, worked to create unique patterns for each of these balustrade components. We then went through a series of prototype tests, looking at different ways to create the pattern in a real-world setting. We tested printing in wax, printing in foam. Where we ended up was printing, taking foam blocks, carving them, and using hot wires to create the undulating effect. And then we used a lost foam sand casting technique to achieve the outcome. And that project's recently been installed down in Melbourne, and you might be able to see it if you are walking around in the streets. This was a project that we completed last year, and I might just get Owen to talk briefly about the artist's intent.
Sure, thank you. So Ronnie Van Hout is a Melbourne-based but New Zealand-born artist. A lot of his work is drawn upon sci-fi and telling stories through sort of very traditional mechanisms of film and the like. His works are often very self-referential, where he puts himself within these pieces. But in this instance, he was commissioned by the Auckland City Council to create a work for a local park called Potter's Park. The park is located next to a children's playground. It's a popular destination for picnics and the like. And so he, rather than putting himself within this work, he put his son, his 11-year-old son, within the work. The work is really founded in the potential for children. Children really have the world at their fingertips if we give them all the right opportunities. So this is a work not just for children, but for us as adults to say, right, we just need to give our children as much opportunity, whether it's a government and education and health, or whether it's us as parents, for those of us that are parents who are inspiring our children and giving them those opportunities. So the work strides at some 5.5 meters in height, with its chin up and looking forward and heading into the future optimistically. There was a really beautiful moment on this day that this photograph was taken, where some kids from the local school came for the press announcement, and there was a bunch of media, and they asked Ronnie, they said, "Why is it a boy and why is he white?" And Ronnie replied saying, "That is a very good question, and that's the question I want you to ask." And he explained that, he can only give his real perspective. He's a white man, his son is a white boy, but he did refer to the works that were made by a Maori woman very, very close by, that were also commissioned by the Auckland City Council, and to say that in society we need to sort of have a balance of everything, and he loved that the children had that inquiry. But the work was created again by using these advanced manufacturing techniques, where we initially scanned physically his son within the workshop, within a studio. So the boy was striding. There was several attempts at seeking to get his son both moving and then still. And in the end, we got him standing still and propped his foot up to get that movement. But it really meant that we could get that detail, the undulating fluency of the shirt, the little knock knee of a boy of his age, the hair and the like. And these technologies were then employed to create the pattern. As you can see there, the work was then cut, milled using our robot at scale directly into foam, and then the work was cast in aluminium and painted. I'll get Samuel to talk about the augmented reality, though, that we employed for the painting, which I think is extremely exciting and really, really served our team very, very well.
So the augmented reality it's not necessarily a new technology, but it's one that we're able to implement on projects now, and it's an amazing time saver. So you can see on the t-shirt of the boy, typically that would take a lot of time for our painter Matt, who's up on the scaffold, to mark out by hand of grids and of drawings, whereas in this instance, wearing the goggles and using augmented reality, he was able to see the lines that he would need to be masking off. And so a task that would have taken hundreds and hundreds of hours took about half that time. And that's the benefit of the advanced manufacturing. It's about making projects more competitive to bring back to Australia and undertake in Australian workshops, because previously we would have undertaken this work offshore in our Shanghai workshop. The other really great use of augmented reality we're finding is that we get projects that are very difficult to document at times. And whilst you can have amazing models, it doesn't make sense necessarily to take those models and transcribe them into 2D drawings, which at the end of the day are there for contractual purposes. So with this work by Katrina Tyler, we had the plates that were cast with her and panel beaten. But in terms of the connections, our fabrication team used augmented reality, saw the model, positioned the pieces as they went and welded them together to create the final outcome. cuts down on time, it's efficient, and right from the start, all of the stakeholders can see the outcome and where we're heading. We've also enjoyed using the HoloLens and augmented reality with a project that we recently completed for Qatar Museums in Doha that was designed by TCL. So the project was a ship playground. It's about 35 metres long. It has a mast that stretches up to about 14 metres in height, and with reference to the workshop, which you can see in the image, the mast would have gone well and truly through the top of the shed. But we had the client out to visit very early on when we built a full-scale replica of one portion, and we were able to put the client onto this full-scale prototype, which was about 8 metres tall and 6 metres wide. And using the HoloLens, they were able to look through, and for the first time after 2 years of design, able to fully comprehend the sheer scale of the project and all of the intricacies of the fit out and the artworks that were going within the ship. That changed the conversation that we were having with that client. They had 1:20 models, they had prototypes and maquettes that they were using, but until they had the opportunity to walk through and see that project for themselves in a virtual world, it had been quite a difficult process to articulate the sheer scale and why it was going to take 9 months to build from scratch. So here are some of the photos, and sadly it just doesn't give an understanding of how enormous this project was. But I'm sure over time we'll be able to get some fantastic imagery, and I know TCL have got some fantastic imagery on their website, so definitely jump over there and have a look. One of the other technologies that we're working with at the moment is 3D printing, and there's lots of people around the place that are doing it, we know that, but we're starting to implement this in real world projects, the most recent being a project for RMIT, sorry, I'm just going to, down at RMIT Brunswick campus. We received a design for some internal cladding and feature walls from Studio Roland Snooks, and having worked with RMIT and Roland Snooks on the technology, we took it from being a process that worked well at a laboratory scale and upscale it to commercialise it and help realise this on a larger scale. So this is printed in PTEG. There was about 60 square metres that was printed. It went in earlier this year, just before the universities closed down. These are structurally sound panels. They fix into the existing structural system, and we've got glazing running behind it. We've got plasterboard walls around it. But each of the panels, which are 3 metres in height, are unique. And that's the benefit of a lot of the robotics and virtual design work that we're undertaking. There's the opportunity to have mass customised, unique outcomes across projects. And I'll hand back to Owen to wrap up.
I think this image is of work by Leonardo Drew. It was a temporary installation commissioned by the Madison Square Gardens Foundation, who ultimately seek to bring people out in New York City to enjoy art, to enjoy culture, to reflect upon who we are as humans. It's probably preaching to the converted, as I sort of mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that as architects, we're city or placemakers, your city and placemakers. You build buildings not purely to be, brooches on the land, but rather to create places that are for humans and for humans to live in, to work in, to bring us together, to move us around, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's a commercial lobby or whatever those sort of instances are. And in each instance, I think we're probably all looking for a reason to go to those places. And COVID, probably with the future of work and, you know, this notion of everybody being able to work at home and separately, why would we, or how do we bring people back into our places, make them feel safe, make them feel connected? We hope that over the next couple of years, art and culture will contribute to that, whether it's a permanent installation in a lobby foyer or whether it's temporary activation that is reinvigorating economies in regional spaces around Australia or other places around the world where we operate. And we hope that images such as this one, which was taken only 12 or so months ago, is the new norm once again. So I'd also like to say that I know that there was a couple of comments about the noise. I'm pleased to say that that's actually a very busy factory in the background of where Samuel is. So he's in Brisbane. So you actually heard people creating these beautiful works for people. So apologies if there was some oversight, but thank you very much. And hand back to Michael and the like for any questions that might come through.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I was wondering what that sound was, and I didn't know whether Samuel was your speaker or your headphone or whatever it was, but I'm glad to see that, you know, factories are still turning over and that we've got people still working through COVID-19. So good to know that it's a noise of productivity. A few questions are coming through, and I would, of course, encourage all of you, if you do have a question, pop it into the chat box and I'll go through them. The first one, this is an interesting question. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on Australia's relationship with public art. The power and the importance of art and culture in everyday life isn't necessarily an objective of our federal government, and it's rarely included in any political or public conversation about our country's identity. But clearly there is a strong connection and a very strong appetite on a local level. Are you, and both of you can answer this, are you both optimistic about the future of using public space to invite or to provoke conversation and build awareness of our historical shadows and our current identity and maybe our future hopes for society?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the history of public art in Australia probably has been patchy, but I would say that over the last decade or so, it has become increasingly significant. It's certainly driven primarily by local governments who are commissioning those works, be they directly through public funding or through the conditioning through development applications. That work is integrated, and the processes are becoming extremely much more sophisticated and therefore much better outcomes. But the CAMA Commission, which was highly contentious, it's part of a master plan for the Botany Bay National Park, is I think a nod to the process that both a federal and a state government accepted needed to be done. They needed to use art to tell a story, and it was a commission that was specifically targeted at Indigenous artists only. Indigenous artists had to respond, but to tell two stories. And I think Alison Page's response was to say, we can't have two separate stories. Australia doesn't have two histories anymore. We rather have a blended history, and contemporary Australia is going to look upon itself as both having a combination of its Indigenous and its non-Indigenous histories, and that's who we are moving forward. And I think commissions such as this will hopefully continue to educate us, and we will have a good understanding that art and culture can help define who we are and be a point of difference. And when we're also going to be calling people from overseas to come and reinvigorate our economy with tourism, art and interventions such as these can help celebrate and promote and attract people to our country.
Another question for you. This is from Peter on the chat, and he asked about copper. Now, we know that silver has been recognised for antibacterial properties, but he says, I wonder how copper could be utilised as a material. Apparently has antibacterial qualities as well. What are your comments on that? It's a bit of a brief question, but I think I know what he's getting at. What are your responses, gentlemen?
Look, bronze is made up of something like 96% copper. So perhaps there's something in that, but I don't think we're in any position to be able to give any advice on
we'll leave it to an industrial chemist, perhaps, or some other sort of expert in that particular field. A question that came through, I mean, that beautiful statue of that little boy, incredible stuff. A question from the chat room was, how do you protect some of those incredible works from vandalism? I mean, how do you keep them out overnight without them getting destroyed?
It's really interesting. You know, we have been delivering work for a very long time, and occasionally we will come in and do rectification works after, say, 10, 15 plus years in when a work has been cited. In each instance, just like a building, you want to maintain the building. You know, there's an operations and maintenance schedule that you clean these works. Vandalism, though, is very rarely one of the reasons that we call back to look at a work. Public art often is placed into places where they're high visibility and they're trying to actually enliven a space and create activity rather than sort of being stuck in the corner. There's anti-graffiti coding details and the like, but we genuinely find that it's when you're in a dark laneway and you're hidden from something and the place isn't properly activated, that's where the graffiti is happening more these days, rather than on beautiful, proud pieces, and artworks create places of pride.
It's good to hear that you don't really have a problem with vandalism or graffiti or anything like that, which is nice to hear. A question from Carly. It's a great question. Carly asks about the role of public artwork changing so it evolves as a result of COVID-19. I mean, do we see, or are you forecasting any of your current projects to change in any way to make them COVID-19 safe effectively?
We do make a lot of playgrounds, as you could see with that work over in the Middle East, but that also is the same for here in Australia. I think that is something that we will need to consider. Some of our clients are the likes of Centre Group or GPT, and shopping centres are places that at the moment, you are encouraged to get in and get out as quickly as possible. But what shopping centres generally try and do is keep people and create sticky places, and art and playscapes can play a part in that. I think that will be just like any piece of intervention that people interact with. They will need to be easily cleaned. So ropes might be a different, that might need to be looked at as slightly differently. But I think the role that art might play, again, as I mentioned before, is potentially in tourism, and this idea of sort of temporary interventions and place activation and commissioning local artists and engaging with local communities and having big feature pieces that might tour around countrysides and engage with local governments to help reinvigorate the economies. The likes are, even drawing upon and looking at places where they were hit by the bushfires. How do we get people into those communities? And creative interventions, I think, will play a part in that over time.
There's a question on the chat from Fadi, and he's got a number of questions here. He says, given architecture defines how space is used, where does urban art projects where do urban art projects see itself in the optimization of space use? And he says, will we start seeing more land reclamation? Will we start to see underwater construction happening around Australia? Is 3D printing underwater a phenomena that's being used already? I don't know the answers to any of these questions. Have you heard of these sort of things before?
Sam, do you want to take that one?
I certainly haven't heard of underwater printing. No. I'm not sure how to answer that one. Might have to take that one on the chin.
Fadi, do some research, send me an email, and if you have further questions on that one, come back to me. But it sounds fascinating. I'm keen to know what the answer is. A question, this is a great question, an inspirational question from Liza on the chat. She thanks you for your presentation, but she also says, what more can we do to create public art levies for public spaces and encourage public art into, say, private developments that are being constructed at the present time?
I think it is a really good question. I mean, one of the ways as architects that I think you can probably explore that and agitate, at the end of the day, it's dollars and cents with commissioning bodies, but nominating ways that an artist might come in and use the provisional sum for a feature wall. We had the example of Judy Watson at 200 George Street. That was always going to be clad in some beautiful stoneware of some sort. But instead we asked an artist to treat that. And the extra over is not that much in the scheme of things. Similarly, the facade for the Ritz-Carlton, there was always going to be a wall there and it was going to be clad in some description. To have, as an architect, I think that's where you guys probably have the biggest sway to create a zone that you are happy to work collaboratively with an alternative creative and to tell those stories. I think that's a really great way of doing it.
And that said, most governments and most councils across Australia have systems set up and some are more generous than others, but the infrastructure is there. And it's certainly on larger projects, there's opportunities to look at new ways to put levies on the projects, but we are talking about public art, and a lot of people outside of this chat and discussion probably see it as something that is not particularly, there's not a great return on investment. We would definitely argue to the contrary, putting public art in and integrated art adds value to projects.
Let's talk about ROI, and this is probably my final question to you because I'm just conscious of time. But in terms of ROI, we always talk about costs. As architects, we're very much wedded to having a distinct project plan and making sure that the budgets are coming through, meet the budget, and that we're on time and we're not overspending. A question from Mike, he says, how do you control costs with such unique developments, unique statues, unique structures being developed, especially when there's a lot of trial and error in some of this stuff? I mean, how do you conserve costs and keep within budget parameters?
Look, it is a constant tussle, probably between the creative and the commercial. UAP is unique insofar as it can draw upon 25 years worth of experience. Everything that we do is unique and it hasn't been done before, so it is often we're looking at new methodologies to need to trial that. But all of those new methodologies are founded upon prior created IP, and the diversity of our 3 studios, which also has unique IP. We go and we have conversations with those people. How long did that take to make? How did you make that? What risk mitigation devices can we put in place? And we draw upon those experiences, those past projects, to calculate where and how we can make sure that it's commercially viable. At the end of the day, that's the risk that we like to take because we want to push the boundaries. We want to find new ways of making things, but we do that within the constructs of the commercial parameters, and that's probably one of the really fun things about sitting at the front end of the business is, how do we figure this out for our clients and our collaborators to achieve their vision and to do it successfully, both creatively and commercially. Samuel might want to add to that, but that's, I think it's about the experience that we draw upon our past projects.
Absolutely, and that IP is an important one. We don't take on these challenges and these new technologies lightly, and they may not necessarily be appropriate for all projects. So we're working on a project at the moment. I'm looking down to where it's being fabricated at the moment, and we've run into some challenges this morning, or overnight and this morning, with the new technology. But we also have a backup, and that is 25 years of people making these sculptures by hand, cutting from foam. So in this instance, we're able to continue moving the project along. And it won't be to the detriment of the artwork or to the client, and it certainly won't impact the budgets from the client's point of view.
Do you see a time, and again, let's make this one the final question. Do you see a time, this is a question from Nick on the chat, and he talked about the time when, do you see a commercial arrangement where you've got a commercial ground floor of a beautiful building, that commercial ground floor space becomes public, and there's a concession given by either council or local or state government to the developers of that building and the owners of that property if they do use public art and open it to the public? Do you see that in Australia's future? Is there more of an acceptance, I suppose, to public art in private sort of major commercial builds?
I think it's happening already. I think Circular Quay is probably a really good example, and the City of Sydney are very, very encouraging of this sorts of development. You've got Lend-Lease, Yoo-Hoo, Mirvac, AMP, a range of interconnecting projects where they're inviting people to cross over between the public and the private, and that art and design, landscape architecture is blurring those boundaries so that the city doesn't feel like a closed off series of buildings, but rather a series of boroughs and suites of places that people can come into and spend their time, engage with local businesses. It's a I think it's underway in our big cities particularly, and I think it'll probably continue to roll out in, I think Sunshine Coast is also doing some master planning where they're getting a whole bunch of different buildings to try and connect in better ways so that those boundaries are blurred. And I think it's a great thing, and I think art helps contribute to that and can draw people into those spaces.
Yeah, it's true. I was in Sydney recently before people stopped flying, and I was having a meeting at Macquarie Bank, and their beautiful ground floor foyer in Martin Place in Sydney features a huge amount of public art that's respectful of the place on which Martin Place is originally developed, which was an ancient Indigenous ground, and they had a beautiful selection of public art celebrating Indigenous culture and heritage, and it was really quite moving to see. So, and that again was open to the public, and they encouraged the public to interact with the art. So it was fantastic, a really good example of how public art can really sort of bring corporate and public places together as well. I think we'll leave it there if that's okay. I'm conscious everyone's got time, you know, the lunch hour is over and you gentlemen have to shoot off to other meetings. But I thank both of you on behalf of the Institute of Architects today, gentlemen, just for your time today. It's been great to have you both, Samuel Mays and Owen Craven, with us today. Thank you very much for your time. That's it for today's Lean In, and thank you very much to all of our frequent leaners for joining us. I've been Michael Linky. I've been your host for today. Look forward to next Tuesday and next Thursday. We've got a Lean In, and we're going to go inside a major architectural firm. We're going to go through Architectus, and one of their principals there is going to open the door to some of the incredible projects they're working on and how they've adapted to COVID-19. So if you want some advice, guidance, support, and just to get a bit of an insider's exclusive look at how a major architectural firm is travelling at the moment through COVID-19, then join me next Tuesday for that. It should be a fascinating session, and we look forward to your interactivity on that too. So thanks again for joining me. I hope it's been an interesting session. Thanks, Samuel, again, and Owen. It's been a fascinating session. But great to see you all. Look forward to catching up with you again next week at our future Lean In session. Have a great day, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you.